Okay, so right now I've established the silhouette of the head and the mid values, and now it's time to render the hair. But before that, let me clean the drawing with this air blower. Right, that's much better. Now we're going to start establishing the dark values, and for this stage, I'll mainly focus on the hair. This is usually the part where the drawing starts gaining a bit more depth and personality, as hair is one of the most expressive parts of human face. I'm starting with the bangs here because this is pretty much the central part of the drawing and I'd like it to be my focal point. Since the eyes are nearby, this area naturally attracts attention. You'll notice that I'm drawing these curves mostly using straight lines. It sounds a little strange, but several straight lines connected together often create a more controlled and natural curve. The tool I'm using here is the blending stump, so the marks tend to be fairly broad and soft. Because of that, I'm not trying to render every single strand of hair individually. Instead, I'm thinking in terms of groups of hair and larger shapes. Hair can quickly become overwhelming if every strand gets equal treatment. Usually, the illusion of hair is more important than the actual strands themselves. And the thing is, you don't always have to follow the previous layer exactly. For example, this section here doesn't look perfectly like the reference photo, but that's alright. So rather than erasing everything and starting over, I can simply draw over it and correct it with this new version of dark layer. Sometimes we don't really fix mistakes. We just paint a better version on top of them. I'd also like to check on this area near the ear. Since this part sits in shadow, I don't feel the need to introduce many details here. Dark areas are often a good place to simplify. This area sits close to some more interesting shapes that I'll develop later with lighter values, so I'm already leaving a little room for those possibilities. But honestly, I try not to overthink hair too much. Just go with the flow. If these textures don't work out, I can always swatch them later and try something else. One of the nice things about charcoal is that it's fairly forgiving, and these darker textures will also help deepen the overall value of the area. The back of the ear here is going to be mostly dark, so let's go ahead and darken it right away. I feel like this area could go a little darker as well. There we go, that feels better. And now let's continue with the bangs again, because I think they're becoming one of the more interesting parts of the drawing. Most of the time, I try my best to follow the hair direction from the reference photo. The photo is there to guide us, even if you don't copy it exactly. I compare back and forth quite often because it's surprisingly easy to drift away from the reference. You don't want to copy it exactly, but it's good to have a clear path. Now let's add this group of hair in front of the forehead. And I think this shape ended up a bit too straight and not curvy enough, so maybe I can fix the curve later. Maybe a little more shading under the hair here. Hair casts shadows too, and I think that's something beginners sometimes forget. Without those shadows, the hair can start looking like it's floating above the head, which feels a bit off. I'll continue this curve first, so I can better understand how to fix it. And for this edge here, maybe I'll nudge it slightly with my eraser. Then I can add a bit more volume to the other side. Right, that looks much better already. Okay, now this hair has a nice curve that I really like. It feels a little more natural now. Also, this area also looks a bit empty to me, so let's add a few more strands here. This is one way I like to break away from simply copying the photograph. As I draw, I often improvise and make small design choices. Sometimes something looks great in the photo, but doesn't translate as well into a drawing. That actually looks pretty nice. Let me clean up this smudge a little. The bangs are looking pretty good now, so let's work on the sideburn here. Hair direction here is important. Some strands flow toward the ear, while others turn toward the jaw. The key is observe. I also like adding a few hairs overlapping the ear like this. Little overlaps like this can help create depth. Next, I'm going to continue darkening this shadow area behind the ear. Most of this section won't contain many details. When drawing, you don't really want details everywhere because everything starts competing for attention. A little detail here and there is usually the way to go. And if something sits in shadow, reducing detail often makes the focal point stronger. Of course, a few more textures here won't hurt. And maybe I'll strengthen this edge slightly as well. So far, things are coming together quite nicely. Now let's tackle the center part of the hair. This section mostly contains smaller dark textures, but I'm also trying to reserve some areas for highlights. It's always helpful to plan ahead. I'll extend these dark values toward the back of the hair as well. Maybe I'll strengthen this edge a little to make the hairline clearer. And I don't really like this gap between the bangs and the side of her forehead. It feels a bit too large to me, so let's reduce it slightly. I think that works much better. Before I continue anything major, I'd like to strengthen this shadow side first. The edge separating the hair and the neck is actually quite important because it affects the silhouette of the portrait. But you know me, I don't always copy the photograph exactly. Sometimes I like softening an edge to create a lost edge where forms gently merge together. Down here, this shape connects to the shoulder, so the angle matters quite a bit. Too low and the neck becomes too long. Too high also don't look good. So I think this area might be a little too dark right now though. And sometimes breaking a straight line can help it feel more natural. At this point, most of the outer edges are established, and now it's really just a matter of darkening the remaining areas. I'll sprinkle a few small textures here and there, just enough variation to keep the hair interesting. Sometimes The little imperfections are what make the drawing feel alive. Okay, so the dark values are mostly done. To create more interesting textures, I like switching to the eraser at this stage. The lighter marks help break up larger shapes that feel a bit too empty. If the highlight becomes too bright, I can always push it back with my finger like this. That's one of the nice things about charcoal. You're constantly adding and subtracting. Of course, everything needs to be done in moderation. It is very easy to overdo these textures and suddenly the hair starts feeling crowded. What I usually do is look for interesting shapes that already exist and simply enhance them. And of course, you can also refer to the photo. For example, this area in the reference has a fairly strong highlight, and I'd like to include that in the drawing. Highlights can really help describe the flow of the hair. And of course, we shouldn't forget the other side as well. We don't necessarily want to copy the photograph exactly here. It's very tempting to render every strand of highlight, but I don't like doing it anymore. One thing that helps is squinting at the reference. Squinting simplifies the values and allows you to group highlights together into larger shapes. Usually, hair reads better as big masses of light and dark rather than countless tiny details. And that's pretty much how I approach drawing hair. It may look complicated at first, but most of the time I'm really thinking about shapes, values, and edges rather than individual strands. At the final stage, I might come back and darken certain areas even further or add a few stronger accents, but of course, those are mostly optional refinements.